Tony Ortega, who is Tony Ortega?
He is a guy that has a blog in New York.
Speaking as an unemployed blogger on the fringes of the internet.
Tony Ortega began his career with the New Times, and his claim to fame was he would create stories, actual fake news. And his big first fake news story attacked 2 teenage girls who had been raped and held prisoner and enslaved.
Just took a phone call. They had the girls in custody. They were safe.
Tonight, a groundbreaking.
Come to find out that Tony Ortega has a connection to Backpage, which is a child trafficking website.
The majority of children who are sold for sex in the United States today was trafficked using Backpage.
His entire Scientology gig was financed by the Village Voice Backpages.
And now this very selfish man, Tony Ortega, wants to prey on someone who's had to go through this tragedy and bring it back again. I mean, really? How low can you go?
A few years later, I moved back to Los Angeles.
Tony Ortega, a man with a blog in New York, started low. Working for a chain of alt-weekly news tabloids in several cities, he first got himself noticed when he exploited 2 teenage girls who were abducted and raped.
Huge break in the kidnapping of 2 California teens. Tamara Brooks and Jacqueline Maris were rescued about an hour ago after cops engaged in a wild shootout with the alleged abductor.
The teens who had attacked their rapist to survive were praised by media. But Ortega had a different take. Lampooning their life and death ordeal, he published a fabricated story that the victims would be hosts of an NBC TV reality show where teenage girls were to be pursued by convicted sex offenders. Ortega's hoax sparked immediate outrage. As one journalist said it, Tony Ortega takes 2 teenagers, already brutally raped, and editorially sodomizes them. It was the start of a pattern for Tony Ortega.
Tonight, KCTV5 begins an investigation that will show you how easy it is for internet predators to meet your children.
Ortega next defended men caught in a pedophile sting in Kansas City.
What are you doing here, man? What are you doing at my door? What are you doing here?
A groundbreaking TV investigation that helped set a precedent for how police monitored sexual predators online.
In just 16 hours, we found 30 men who hoped to meet an underage teen face-to-face for sex.
Ortega lashed out at the station in 17 pages of articles for what he called a peep show and their pervert, obsessed, and sleazy ways. And he excused one of the men caught on camera as just, quote, fighting boredom on his job. From one paper to the next, Ortega was working for the 2 men he called his overmasters. Michael Lacey and James Larkin owned the Village Voice media chain of alt-weekly tabloids, which included the flagship Village Voice in New York, and the classified advertising website Backpage.com, which generated the chain's revenue. In 2007, Lacey and Larkin moved Tony Ortega to New York and the Village Voice. They needed a yes man to defend their interests at all costs. Within 6 months, Ortega had fired or driven out 11 women at the paper. The remaining staff didn't fare much better. Long-term Voice journalists called Ortega a twisted human being who demeans people who work for him, and the most abusive editor they'd ever had. But for Tony Ortega, his 5-year stint at the Village Voice was about much more than editing content.
Part of my job when I was at The Voice was try to get that
legendary newspaper to think of itself more as a digital enterprise, right?
A big part of that digital enterprise was the company's classified advertising on Backpage.com.
With its racy online listings, the website Backpage.com has long been targeted by law enforcement as a hub for prostitution bookings.
Backpage is involved in nearly 3/4 of all reports of online child sex trafficking.
Michael Lacey and James Larkin used that website to run a multi-million-dollar sex trafficking and prostitution ring.
Backpage grew into the world's biggest online hub of sex trafficking and a black market of sex-trafficked children who are pimped, beaten, raped, and slain.
This big old building right here, going with the Christmas lights on it. Been in this building over a dozen times. Different clients each time, sometimes the same client. Backpage makes it easier because the men can buy whatever they need. And they can buy rugs for their wives, gifts for their children, and buy a child as well.
Backpage was big money, eventually reaping more than $100 million a year, more than 90% of which came from its so-called adult ads. That revenue funded Village Voice Media and Tony Ortega's paycheck.
We cannot turn our backs to the suffering that is being caused by these Backpage ads.
What goes on at Backpage, sponsored by the Village Voice, is today's modern-day auction block. Yeah!
Pressure grew on Village Voice and Backpage from law enforcement agencies, members of Congress, journalists, human rights, and religious organizations, the Church of Scientology prominently so. Tony Ortega, as spokesman for Backpage.com, took his lead to protect the digital sex trafficking enterprise and its profits, lashing out against statistics of child sex trafficking as a national fantasy and a mass panic, and announcing evidence of minors as young as 12 being pimped through its listings. He dehumanized sex-enslaved children as underage prostitutes and victim-shamed them as underage users of Backpage who violate the site's terms of use. But Ortega's role was not only to deflect, deceive, and disinform. It was to smear critics, from outspoken activists to investigative reporters and, most prominently, the Church of Scientology. He ramped up his onslaught against the church in what his own staffers called an obsession, until it all but consumed the Village Voice.
I don't have an editor telling me what I can or can't write about, so I can just keep working on this fascination that I have.
Then, Tony Ortega was ousted. Ortega's public story is that he left the Village Voice on his own volition. But the untold story was revealed by the man he went to see in Texas, Mark Rathbun, the anti-Scientologist leader and guru who had become his confidant.
He said, this can't go anywhere, but what happened is that the Village Voice had been accused of promoting the child sex slave industry by its Backpage's ads. And he told me that Scientology had been exposing that, and he said the problem is that Scientology was more accurate than anybody thought. And so the owners decided they had to get rid of Tony Ortega because he was just obsessed with Scientology and he was keeping their focus on him and their operation, so they needed to get rid of him. He literally agreed to cover it up and obstruct justice for a payout of essentially a 2-year buyout deal.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Events would later indicate why Tony's bosses bought his silence. Law enforcement and a U.S. Senate investigation revealed a criminal conspiracy of deception at Backpage, all to keep the obscene profits rolling in.
They did not turn away ads selling children. They just tried to make it less obvious. And worse, coached the traffickers and the pimps on how to clean up their ads. Not turning away their business. Those children were still sold. They just tried to sanitize it.
Backpage co-founders Mike Lacey and Jim Larkin were arrested and charged with pimping, the first time they've faced criminal charges.
Evidence led to the criminal collapse of Ortega's former bosses, and Backpage.com was seized by authorities and shut down. It was undisclosed details about those sex ads that apparently kept Tony Ortega out of the fire. That was what Village Voice veteran, the late Wayne Barrett, told an investigator several years before all hell broke loose. Quote, changes made by Ortega to the ad sales form have allowed the underage ads to flourish. But Ortega kept his end of the deal with his bosses, saying not a word about Backpage after leaving the Village Voice.
This is what I should be blogging about. That's when I made the switch.
Unemployed, Ortega had one thing to bank on. A professed atheist, he had long since established his beat of anti-religious bigotry and fanaticism with inflammatory speech against different faiths, as well as the religiously devout. And he found the perfect collaborator in the woman he would soon marry, Ariel Silverstein. A woman who calls herself a Jewish atheist. Silverstein uses aliases to post incendiary, anti-religious, and racist hate speech and imagery against Muslims, against Jews, against Christians, and against Scientologists, including joining with Tony Ortega in the cyber hate group Anonymous. With Silverstein at his back, Ortega pursued his obsession with Scientology. He made his place with the faction of anti-Scientologists. There, he got backing from former Mistress for Hire, Karen Della Carriere, to start a full-time undertaking as their blogger.
Here's the reality with Karen Della Carriere. I mean, she was boasting and bragging to people that she owned Tony Ortega because of the amount of money that she had invested into them and that she had kept them going. I mean, she's bragged about that. She's notorious for bragging about that.
Ortega partnered with two hostile former Scientologists on an explicit agenda of harassment against the church and its leader. Mike Render, a man expelled from Scientology for criminal misconduct, and best known for violently assaulting his wife and disabling her for life. And Leah Remini, an actress notorious in the industry and with employees, friends, and associates as abusive and toxic. Ortega proceeded to post more than 1,200 blogs on or referring to his partners and their scurrilous attacks, nearly one every other day over a course of 8 years.
Mike Render's explained it to me. Tony will run anything because he's got nothing to lose, because he's a nobody with a blog. And what he'll do is he'll put out the sleaziest, most criminal innuendo with little grains of truth mixed in and keep repeating it enough with the intention that tabloids at some point will start to pick it up.
Always seeking that tabloid bait, Ortega has relied on every anti-Scientologist he can attract to his following, no matter how discreditable, including a 2-time convicted felon and violent deprogrammer, another violent kidnap deprogrammer, a woman who conspired to murder her father, a man accused of rape, and assailants and thieves. Ortega calls his following his, quote, Scientology watchers, a euphemism for the hate group he serves. and he echoes times past under the guise of reporting. He contacts employers to out Scientologist employees, to harass and try to cost them their jobs. He tries to incite boycotts of Scientologists' products, interfere with their advertising, intimidate their associates, and meddle in their private lives. Well over 200 instances of harassment, smearing, and shaming for no other reason than the religion of his targets. Nothing is off limits to Ortega, including personal relationships.
I will tell you that Tony Ortega, this guy is a complete piece of shit, whose only product in life is to destroy relationships. He got to a good friend of mine since 1965 when I was in college. He'd been a friend of mine for 45 years, and he turned that guy against me.
Ortega invades families for his own ends. Not even children are spared.
What kind of sleazebag takes a picture of a child and puts it out on the internet without a parent's permission? Certainly not a journalist. I felt horrified. I felt violated by this guy. And I'm like, who the hell are you to take my kid's image that was private, by the way? It was a private photograph. And he took it and made it public. It was so sleazy and disgusting, I couldn't believe it.
Ortega has gone so far as to orchestrate and take part in a deprogramming attempt.
They were trying to alter my way of thinking, have me feel like what I was saying was wrong. And the more that if I was to not agree with what they're saying, they'd get angry. And there's this anger that would go in. Like, I want to go. No. You're going to listen to me. Like, I knew I had to get out of this place. I was in a danger because, they were trying to, mind fuck me, I've never been confronted, I guess. I've never been confronted to not have the freedom to be what I want to be, follow what I want to follow, and do what I want to do. No one has any right to do that.
But Ortega takes his obsession even further, time and again exploiting personal tragedy for religious hate, as in the case of this mother.
So the day after Taylor's memorial, I went out and got this beautiful tattoo. And what this is angel wings. They're the identical ones that she had on her back. And her half-sister and I did that together. And while I was there, I got a phone call from Tony Ortega. I had no idea who he was. I had no idea what his website was or anything. And I thought that he was calling. He said he was a reporter. I thought he was calling because there's an incredible story that happened where people all over the world sent off red balloons. Red was Taylor's favorite color. And out of nowhere, he says to me, "So, do you think your daughter killed herself over Scientology?" I will never forget those words. I was jarred that anybody would have the gall to talk to me like that. And so I was like, no, absolutely not. I begged him. I said, "Tony, please don't publish this story. I have been through absolute hell. This has been the worst thing imaginable." And I said, "Please don't do this to us. Please don't do this to my family. We don't deserve this. If you have problems with other people, fine, but just stop with this. I can't take any more." And he said, "We'll see about that," and hung up on me.
But Ortega and his partner Leah Remini ignored her pleas. The result was a rash of hate and threats against the bereaved mother. It was of no concern to Tony Ortega. But this is, after all, the same man who ignores the pleas of mothers whose children were being trafficked for sex. The same man who parodies rape victims and condones pedophilia. The same man who colludes with criminals and abusers, and who serves as the mouthpiece of an anti-religious hate group. This is, after all, Tony Ortega.